All right. Welcome back to another episode of Your Platform Podcast. I'm here with a very special guest who's making a profound impact in the lives of others experiencing grief. Our guest today is Kate Mollison.
Thank you so much for saying that correctly.
I practiced. I had to go through podcasts that you were on just to make sure that I was pronouncing it correctly. But Kate is a grieving expert and the founder of On Tuesdays We Wear Black. Kate has dedicated her life to helping individuals navigate the complex and often overwhelming journey of grief. Through her company, she provides essential support, resources, and sense of community of those who have lost loved ones. Kate's work is not just about coping with loss, but about finding hope and resilience amidst the pain. Kate, welcome to my show. I'm so happy you came.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for traveling. It seems like you got a little hung up there, but that's okay. Things happen.
We made it work.
We made it work and we move forward.
And I love that you did your homework. Like you took a look at my stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You knew what I was going to be about.
Yes, I did. And shout out to Mark Waters. Had some time to do so because I think we scheduled this about a month ago.
Yeah.
And I like to just really prepare about the people that I'm bringing onto the show. And to that point, the purpose of my show is I think everybody has a story, or I guess I know everybody has a story. And I want to use this platform as an opportunity for people to share it. And I'm curious to know what you've done before, what your work was, because was this your expertise before?
No.
This was something you jumped in?
Yeah.
All right. So go ahead, please.
I like to joke and say that I've lived 10,000 lives.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm fortunate enough to have the gift of perspective where all of my other former iterations of myself kind of came to a head with this business. And really the impetus of it was losing my husband unexpectedly 3 years ago. So I was widowed, tragically. It was the peak of COVID, not COVID related. I feel like I have to, clarify there. But it was 2 days before Thanksgiving, day before his birthday.
Wow.
I have 2 small children, 2 adult disabled parents who are living at home. And it was a firestorm of all the perfect variables to make my life a living hell. And I spent the first 2 years of just boots on the ground trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. How do I open an estate? How do I file probate? And how do I fight for wrongful death? And how do I advocate for an autopsy and sell a home that doesn't belong to me and stay in a home that I'm technically not supposed to be staying in? And I ended up squatting in my own marital home due to my name not being on the mortgage and things, and Connecticut not being a common law state. I don't just automatically inherit the house. Right. So it's navigating all of these nuances and things we don't stop to think about and prepare for until it happens to us. And I got to the end of that first 2 years and felt like I'd been waterboarded with gasoline. And I was like, it doesn't have to be that hard. Like, can't we make this a little bit more easy? And I started trying to help other people who were having a similar experience navigate that a little bit more easily. So I do individual support services for people in grief, helping them navigate the bereavement side of it, the legal, financial. And then from there, I realized the bigger opportunity to change the landscape is educating business owners, because the real hurdles I encountered came when I went back to work. I was working a corporate retail job. I was doing what was supposed to have been a 9 to 5. And I went back to work the week of Christmas because that's when my bereavement leave was up. Plus emptying my PTO bank. Yeah. And you're expected to work at full capacity.
Right.
I worked 76 hours that week. Having 2, my daughter was 19 months old, my son was 11.
Wow.
And hoping that the parents who are, my mother mentally incapacitated, my father physically, together they make one whole person. So
Right.
hoping that's enough to child rear while I have to go and do the adult things.
Right.
And I'm not even processing grief at that point. So once the smoke starts to settle from all the to-dos, your brain is just flooded with all of these chemicals and feelings and thoughts, and you're expected to just be okay at that point.
Thank you for sharing. I have a ton of questions just because I have my own, I don't want to say perception of grief, so me and my wife, we talk about it. We joke around all the time. And it's not to joke in the light of loss, because I think loss is, people process it a little bit, differently. But I always wonder with loss is, are people, do you, in your experience, do you feel like people mentally prepare for them to be tough after something like that was to happen? Because I think about, you know, the most recent loss I had was a friend in 2011. He passed away in a car accident.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. He was it was, but I was, I can remember at that time being like, why? And then really hardening up after. And now when I think of future loss, I can put myself into this present state of like, I'm going to be fine after that. Do you find that this is like, that it's a coping mechanism that people try to prepare for, especially as things get closer in life, that something like that might happen?
It's like, so the analogy I use is, imagine that you're falling out of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
When you see the ground coming, you instinctively put your arms out, and you more likely are to break an arm by doing that. It's a brace for impact. When we think about death in a vacuum, that haha conversation with a spouse, or like, oh, my late husband always used to say, just throw me in a chock full of nuts coffee can in the bottom of the closet, I'll be fine. And we would laugh about it, because that's what you do when you're married. You have these very weird conversations about the end of life, but they're snapshot kind of throwaway conversations. And then you brace for impact, where you put it out of your mind. You don't think about it. And then when it happens, you went, well, that chock full of nuts situation isn't really viable. Well, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
And you almost set yourself up for failure by doing that. So it's better to not brace for impact, in my professional opinion.
Okay. Well, that's good advice. You mind if I ask what your husband was like?
Oh God, Craig was ineffable. One of my favorite words, which I learned from him. He was a literary savant, had an amassed personal library of books, very well read, very smart, very binary and analytical and logical. He very much was that methodical, process-driven person, which makes perfect sense because he was an IT guy.
Okay.
He worked for the state of Connecticut for over 25 years. Very much a systems and that kind of person. But he also had a really great sense of humor, that dry British humor, secretly loved Broadway musicals. It's actually where the name of my business comes from, is his love for Broadway musicals. Wow. So he would be rolling in his grave right now if he didn't, if I were to tell people this, but his favorite musical was the Broadway adaptation of Mean Girls. So it's not lost on me that that's now in theaters this year. I'm like, thanks, Craig, just for the reminder. But so much so that he would wear a pink tie to work on Wednesdays. Wow. Or people who knew him very closely in the circle, he would whisper to them like, you can't sit with us. Now, mind you, Craig was 6'2", 380 pounds, full white beard. Like, you would not have guessed this individual to be like about Broadway musicals, but he is singing every part in the car, putting on a full concert anytime we went somewhere. So he passed away on a Tuesday. So while we wear pink on Wednesdays, on Tuesdays we wear black.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And
thank you for asking about him.
Yeah, and again, doing the research of him and your story about how it all kind of unfolded. I wanted to know what he was like. I think that's part of what you do is a reflection of him, right? And
it's the gift that he leaves me, the legacy that I get to talk about him every day for my job. I get to say his name every day as my job.
Yeah.
And while we were only married for shy of 10 years, I may not have gotten my happily ever after from him, but I got to be his, right? Like, it was, I still have people come up to me this day and tell me like, you would not believe how happy you made Craig. And so it's a gift to get those anecdotes and those connections and those stories from people who knew him in times that I didn't. It's just, what a gift.
Yeah.
To get to carry his legacy forward.
How's that make you feel? Like, that people come to you and say, hey, he really appreciated you, he really loved you. And
it's big, right? Like, it's bigger than me. And sometimes I don't feel worthy of that badge of honor, but then I remember, as he always used to say, it was engraved in our wedding rings, everything happens for a reason.
That's, I'm going to clip that and make that the...
And I generally, let me clarify.
Sure.
I hate that as a platitude.
Yeah.
And we as grievers, specifically as widows, hear a lot of them, right? It is, well, at least he's not suffering, or he wouldn't want you to be sad, or, everything happens for a reason. It's all part of God's plan.
Yeah.
Whatever empty,
Right.
space filler that you want to throw at me. We hear those a lot. So I generally don't like to throw them back. But the one that resonates with me is everything happens for a reason. And by that, I mean, we meet the people we're supposed to meet when we meet them.
Right.
Everything that happens in our life can be a lesson.
Yeah.
How do we reflect and stay present and appreciate, have the gratitude for the experiences that we've had, and not get hardened by the traumas that we live?
So when this is all going on, and obviously the traumatic experience of obviously the loss, what was the hardest thing for you during the post, after it all happened? And like you said, you had to get back to work in 5 weeks, or shorter than probably 5 weeks, right?
2.5
weeks. I have to imagine you have to mask a lot of the emotion that's going on, because you have your 2 children that you're taking care of. You got to be on top of the stuff for them. And then you also have to work. And if you're in customer service, you got to put your customer service face on. You're masking a lot during this time.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And that is part of the unseen trauma that I'm working to eventually, discontinue in our world, right? Changing the grief landscape is about changing how grief manifests in our bodies, and that delayed reaction that it can have. The chemicals in our brain don't really start to be produced at maximum levels for 5 to 7 weeks after the intrinsic loss. And the way our legislation is written now, technically, legally, you're entitled to 3 days bereavement leave.
Wow.
That's the legal obligation.
Days. Wow.
If your employer's kind, they'll give you 5.
Wow.
And beyond that, you have to empty your PTO bank, or hope that you have comp times or float holidays or those types of things. I was fortunate enough to have PTO, but think about the not full-time, not management employees who have a loss,
right,
and then have to go back to work performing menial duties without that time to heal. So to answer your question, the hardest part was probably watching my children grieve, right? And it's different for kids. Their brains aren't developed to understand what's happening the way my brain was, or the way my parents' brains were, or his other, his father or his sister. The adults weren't, it's not the same. And so now there's delayed grief. So we're 3 years out. And now I'm watching my now 5-year-old and 15-year-old go through it again. And then another couple of years, when they have developmental changes, they'll go through it again.
Wow.
And so it's just that waiting to just continually pour salt in that open wound for a long time.
This is one of the, God, I have 2 young ones. This is probably one of the more emotional times I've had on my podcast, because I think of them. And, my wife and I, going back to some conversations that we have, and I don't know if this is a form of, again, kind of preparing for grieving. And I'm really selfish in thought when it comes to this kind of stuff, because she's always like, I'm just so afraid of leaving my babies. And I am too. I love my children. I don't, to think, again, when I'm gone, and when she's gone, things happen. But I'm really hardened to the fact that that's out of my control, in the sense that I kind of be gone. I'll be gone. But we will often say, like, we don't want to leave them. And just what you just explained really resonated with me, because I felt that. And thank you again for sharing that.
Of course. The best thing I think that you can do personally, and for your listeners, just, some input. You can't change that you're going to die, right? But you can be transparent about that with them. You can start those conversations and normalize it in an appropriate age development capacity. There are tons of books and resources out there.
Are there?
Yep.
What age is, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
go ahead.
At what age is it appropriate to start talking about that?
I think as early as they can understand language, because the more normalized it becomes, the more capable they are to prepare for it, and the more you're able to not compartmentalize it. I also think getting them comfortable with the concept of loss can be cross-applicable, right? Grief is not intrinsic to death. So how do they deal with that first big breakup, or when you have to put the dog down, or you're moving to a new house because somebody got a better job, or mom and dad get divorced, God forbid, or grandma dies, or whatever, your best friend from elementary school goes to a college across the country and then you just don't talk to them anymore.
Mm-mm.
You don't get that big job that you interned for.
Yeah.
All of these life experiences that we have are directly tied to grief. And we do a terrible job as a human race of preparing the next generation for processing that.
Yeah. We had an experience with my son. We got a fish tank for Christmas, and we had 8 fish in the tank. One of them was named Foghorn. He's obsessed with foghorns.
I love that.
And so I ended up going to Florida for a couple of days in February, and my wife called me on my way back, was like, "Hey, Foghorn died."
Oh no.
And I'm like, "Oh no." Okay. She's like, "Can you get him out of the fish tank before Camden gets home?" So I'm like, "Yeah, I went ahead and did that." So I got him and took him out, and it was 3 weeks that passed on, and Camden went to go feed the fish and goes, "Where's Foghorn?" And me and my wife looked at each other, because it's been 3 weeks now that he hasn't noticed that he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked at each other and we're like, "What do we do?" And so my wife goes, "Camden, Foghorn died." And I kind of stood there like, "What?"
Because we never know if we're making the right decision, right?
Correct.
We don't want to unload unnecessary trauma onto our children. We don't want to
Correct.
make them sad. It's our parent, biologically,
Correct.
we're wired as parents to protect our children and to keep harm and sad and bad from them, right?
Yes.
But think about what that does to set them up for success.
Mm-hmm.
I think about my daughter, who is now 5, and we didn't really have those conversations because we didn't really have any of those experiences. And now having to have those conversations in retrospect with her, I think about how much more ahead of the game she could have been had there been opportunity for those conversations.
Right.
So finding moments like that to just be transparent.
Yeah.
There's a lot of relationship building
Right.
and trust building as a parent or as a caregiver in general.
Right.
So kudos to your wife for
shout out to
that
her
conversation, because that's not easy.
It's not easy. And I was there, like, again, I kind of had like this smirk because I wasn't making light of the fact that he was upset, but I kind of did not know how to answer it.
That's normal. People will laugh in the face of discomfort. It's a very common reaction to, I've had people laugh at funerals before. People look at them like they're crazy. I'm like, because they just don't know where that energy needs to go when it comes out in a nervous laugh.
Right. So let's give me the end all, or your mission for On Tuesdays We Wear Black. What is that mission for you, and what are you trying to portray?
Yeah. And so I'll back up just a little bit to clarify that I'm not just, I'll back up a little bit just to clarify that I'm not, just some crazy widow on a soapbox. But after I had the loss, after Craig passed away, which was abhorrent. Like I said before, it was just the perfect storm of situations, like peak of COVID and like his birthday and Thanksgiving and Christmas, and everything was just terrible. And then having lost the house, and I got to the end of that 2 years, and having squatted in my own home with my children for 3 months, and then moved to this new house and starting new schools for the kids and all of that navigation, I went, okay, well, I guess I have to go back to work. So I tried doing the retail thing again, and I did that for about a year. And it was just not in it for me to punch someone else's clock. Mm-hmm. And I was very transparent with that job when I got it, because I had stepped away from my job that I was at when Craig passed away. And so when I went to do this new job, I was very clear. Like the interview, I came up to the guy and I was like, I am going to call out. I am going to leave early. Mm-hmm. I am probably going to just not show up every now and then. Sure. I have children at home and I will be there for them. Mm-hmm. No questions asked. I will not be available on the weekends. I am not available before 8 a.m. and after 4 p.m. If you cannot handle that, then don't let me waste your time. Right. I left that interview like, I'm never going to get a phone call. And they called me. Great. So shout out to them. Yeah. I won't name names, but shout out to them. You know who you are. And it was just a really game-changing perspective. And it was great for a while, but then it just got to the point where I'm sitting in traffic, rushing to get home, to put dinner on the table, to get everyone in bed, to just wake up the next morning and rinse and repeat. And it was not good for my mental health to live in this trapped cycle where I couldn't go to doctor's appointments and I couldn't do grocery shopping and I couldn't do all that other stuff. So that became really frustrating. And I had started blogging about my feelings, right? A friend of mine recommended, like, maybe you just need to put pen to paper and process things. And then I had people start to reach out, not thinking this blog would go anywhere. Friends of friends of friends, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, as I like to say. And they would, hey, can you talk to my mom's best friend's, cousin? Their husband passed away. I'm like, sure. Like, and someone else would call me, hey, do you have any resources for my uncle's sister? Her daughter passed away. I'm like, sure. And I ended up starting to help people. And it kind of dawned on me. I was like, there's an opportunity here. So I went back to school. I became a certified grief coach and trauma specialist. I have a degree in clinical case management, and I'm a certified case manager. And I did that before my retail career as well. That's what my college degree is in. So I'm not just some crazy widow standing on a soapbox to clarify for people that I took what happened to me and I alchemized it into a training and a discipline and a business model, because I see the potential to make a difference for people, not just better my own situation, but to unilaterally start the dialogue about changing the grief landscape.
I love that. I'm curious, when it comes to that kind of grief, what kind of services you guys offer, especially the is there a preparation for death, if you will, that you offer, and maybe some of the other ones that you offer?
Yeah. So first piece of advice I'll give you is don't think about how you're going to feel so much, and just try to feel it when it happens. Allow it. We're really good at logicizing how we feel. Well, I think I feel, and I do it too, right? We don't realize we're doing it until someone else calls us out on it.
Right.
So just allow. Just sit with the discomfort. Allow the feeling to just take up space in your body and figure out what it is and where it lives. For some people, grief lives in their chest and it feels like a heaviness in their chest. For some people, it's a pit in their stomach or a hot spot in their stomach. Other people, it's tension in the headache, like tension in the head and the neck that creates headaches. Grief manifests in very physical ways. It's common for your body to produce and retain extra fluid. You are, your immune system is decreased. You're more susceptible to diseases and infections and things. So it's not lost on me that we don't want to sit with those feelings because we carry it in our physical bodies. And that sucks, right? Like, I don't want to hurt. I don't want to be discomfort or, uncomfortable. But that's the best advice I can give people when they're trying to figure out how to get comfortable with the concept of death, is really embrace the discomfort. That's the first paramount step, and talking about it, being transparent about it, talking to your kids about it, because they're going to be around when the dog passes, to use that example specifically. Like, I'm not sure how old your kids are, but thinking about it in age appropriate ways, talking about how old the dog is. And 7 doesn't sound old, but explaining it, well, for a dog, their lifespan is usually only 15 years or so. So you're, like, in the words of John Bon Jovi, you're halfway there. Like, sorry, I got to add a little.
I love that.
Got to lighten the mood a little bit, But really, the way to prepare for death is by just radical acceptance, right? We are all going to die. Someone we know is going to die. Someone we knew has already died.
Yes.
It isn't inevitable. And just talking about it and embracing it is going to be paramount.
Is there a difference between, or I guess, what do you think the difference is between saying the unexpected death and then later in life knowing that there's death? Is there the same type of grieving?
They're apples to oranges, but they live in the same produce department.
Yeah. Okay.
One, I can't say one is better or harder or, they're different, but they're in the same ballpark and each have their own complexities. Sudden death is traumatic and unraveling, and there's more, there's different pieces with it. An expected death, whether it be a terminal illness or something like that, you have something called anticipatory grief, where you're grieving the person before they're even gone. And then you think you're okay. You're like, I already said goodbye to them. And then they pass, and that wave can hit you again, either harder or delayed, or there's all sorts of types that grief, can manifest. There's complex grief, there's delayed grief, there's anticipatory grief, there's disenfranchised grief. So, for the people out there listening, go do some research. You'll be really surprised at how grief already exists in the world, and we just don't talk about it.
Why do you think we don't talk about it? Is there some sort of stigma behind grieving, or?
Because grieving means death for most people,
Yeah.
and most people don't like to question their own mortality.
Mm.
It's that larger than themselves
Right.
conversation, because talking about death forces us to think about what happens after.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, you have to find your own personal, morals and
Sure.
beliefs and systems that, whatever that sounds like to you. And people don't like to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and you can compartmentalize them a little bit, but it's again, getting comfortable with that uncomfort and offering services like my company offers. So I work with the individuals. I do the pre-planning stuff for people. I often say the greatest gift you can give to your children is a comprehensive estate plan, because you're doing it for them. You're not doing it for you. By having guardianship figured out and conservatorship figured out and a living will and a last will and testament and all of those other legal documents, whatever is best tailored to your personal situation, that is the gift, because then they don't have to bereave.
Right.
They don't have to do the legal financials. They get to grieve. They get to do the emotional stuff. And would you want your children to not have space for the emotional processing of your loss and be able to celebrate your life? Or do you want them to get stuck in red tape and paperwork?
So this is actually perfect segue into what I wanted to ask. I actually was perusing your blog, and by the way, I love it.
Thank you.
Again, the courage you have to just let it all out and share with people. I think that's beautiful. I think that you're right. I think more people need to be accepting of what I think the one thing, one of your links were the two things in life: death and taxes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The two things that are inevitable, and we just don't talk about them.
We don't talk about them. So I love that. But I really was interested in secondary loss, and maybe kind of on a selfish way, because of what I do for a living, the insurance aspect, the life insurance and whatnot. Elaborate a little bit what the secondary losses are. And I was interested, obviously, the financial piece, but the identity roles that now become kind of almost disappears because of the loss. Elaborate that for me.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, secondary loss is any other loss that happens as a ripple effect in relation to that primary loss. So the loss of my spouse, loss of Craig, was the primary loss. The loss of our home, the loss of a financial stability situation, the loss of a marriage, the title of Mrs. Mollison, all of those things no longer exist. Those are secondary losses. And you're right, the identity piece, specifically for widows, is paramount, right? Where women have this tendency to wear tons of hats, right? I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, all these things. But our title is very much intrinsically tied to our spouse. I am Mrs. Mollison. Well, if I'm not Mrs. Mollison anymore, then who am I? And it's, what do I like? What do I enjoy? What do I do? What do I have passions for that aren't driven by that communal relation?
Right.
And that's not to say that I didn't have things that I individually was interested in or pursued, but as someone who's married, that our social circles are usually tied up in our marriage, and our extracurricular activities are tied up in our children and our marriage, and the way we plan our calendar and the way we plan our day and the way what side of the bed we sleep on is all predetermined by that relationship that has taken time to intrude your life.
Right.
Remove that just suddenly. What side of the bed do I sleep on? It feels terrible to leave his side of the bed empty, but do I sleep on his side of the bed? That's weird. I don't know how I feel about that. Okay. Which towel do I use? That was his towel, or stuff like that you don't think about, that all just continually slap you in the face with you don't know who you are. So it is a wild discovery of figuring out, you're oh, I really don't like mushrooms. I don't have to order them on my pizza anymore and then pick them off. Oh, I really don't enjoy waking up to that alarm sound. And how you make peace with letting go of those things that were part of your communal life and your marriage and your foundational understanding of how you fit into the world. And then finding and making space for new.
Right.
There's a lot of guilt and bittersweetness and sadness in that process. But again, I say get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Anyone going through it, as much as it sucks and it hurts and it's hard. And I'm not saying throw everything away.
Right.
Yeah, I certainly have tons of his stuff still.
Mhm.
He very much is a part of my everyday life beyond my business. But it's rediscovering and reconnecting with who you are. And
Right.
when they say you can't love until you love yourself,
Mhm.
this was the ultimate like boot camp in practicing that, because there is no one who's going to come save you.
Do you have a team or is it just you?
I am a one-woman show. I am Cirque du Solo, as I like to say.
Solo, that's great.
Yeah, but I do it all, soup to
Yeah,
nuts.
yeah.
I'll do the individual planning, and I do comprehensive funeral planning. I do resource negotiation, so I will connect people with real estate agents, financial planners, mortgage officers, credit repair people, landscapers, movers, property management companies. I even provide transportation coordination. I will do appointment companionship. So if someone doesn't have local family and they don't want to go sit at the lawyer's office by themselves, that's something I do. So I connect people with therapists, physical therapists, primary care physicians, addiction support services,
Wow,
support groups.
that is awesome.
Yeah. So I provide literal soup to nuts for the individual.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I wonder, and again, kind of going back to the secondary loss, and again, I have so many people, life insurance, right? Well, just quick, people don't want to talk about life insurance, and I always wonder why. Oh, I'm all set, I have it through work, or
because it's a luxury item. Because 90% of employers will offer a bare minimum policy, and that comes out of their paycheck, and they don't have to think about it.
Right.
It's not really a financial burden on them, and there's employer match. But let me tell you what, Craig had a government job, and that employee provided life insurance policy was peanuts. No disrespect to the state of Connecticut,
Sure.
but at the same token, that number, and okay, I'll be very transparent. $28,000 is not.
I was just
nothing,
about to ask,
right?
Yeah.
$28,000 is not anything to sneeze at.
Yeah.
But when you are being faced with a sheriff serving you with paperwork to vacate your own home in 90 days, and you've only been in the house for 5 years, so you owe basically the full mortgage on it. $28,000 is not going to solve that problem.
Right.
How do you choose between groceries and fuel oil? How do you pay for property taxes and immediately fire sale? It was a reduction of overhead. Like I had no time to think because I had lost 60% of my income. And it wasn't for 3 months that I then discovered he had a supplemental policy.
Wow.
Now, we had a very healthy, well marriage, no reason for there to be secrets. But why did he not tell me about a supplemental policy that he purchased for over $200,000? At that point, when I found it, I was like, well, I'm glad I delayed because my brain was working a little bit better.
Right.
And I probably would have taken that money and just immediately thrown it at the house.
Yeah.
But to run the numbers would have bought me 5 years.
Right.
And I would have been right back in the same situation where I was able to take the money and run and go buy a property and own it outright and secure housing for my children and put my feet on solid ground.
Right.
So talking with financial advisors and insurance agents before making decisions and understanding that we hire these people as trusted, vetted individuals to bounce those ideas off of. They're not necessarily here to just sell you something.
Right. Thank you for that's an advertisement for me right there. I appreciate that.
Big recommendation: buy the supplemental policy.
Yeah.
It will save your loved ones' lives.
Love it. What's your approach to grieving? Right. I come to you. Hey, I lost someone in my life. This is what I'm going through. I don't want to get out of bed. I can't eat. Just everything seems like it's moving so slow. What's that approach like?
The first thing I want to say is that grief is like a fingerprint. It is unique to each individual, and you can have similar loss experiences. You can have similar grief symptoms, but it will manifest differently on a different timeline for each person. So go ahead and throw away the 5 stages of grief. That is even admitted by Kubler, the author of that book, is outdated. She recently came out and admitted, I wish I'd never written this because it's outdated and people have kind of twisted it and used it for things that it's not originally intended for. The second thing is to completely validate your experience, to say it is okay. It is normal. It is perfectly acceptable for you to take it one day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time, because grief is like an ocean, and you are out here in a tiny little rowboat in open water fighting the storm. It's like the movie A Perfect Storm with Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah.
They're on that little dinghy boat, right, out in the middle of the water and fighting this big wave. And just when you think the boat is going to capsize, you find enough fortitude to ride the wave and things level out. And those waves are going to keep coming.
Yeah.
Sometimes fast and furious and all at once. And sometimes it's going to take time and it's going to ebb and it's going to flow. But grief is like a muscle. The more we practice using it and embracing it and riding it, the more resiliency we have with it. So as far as a support methodology for that person, I can't tell anyone how to grieve.
Sure.
It's not my job to tell them what to do, but I educate and I present them with options and I empower them, because it's about power of choice, right? When we lose someone intrinsic to us, so many things are happening to us.
Right.
So how do we give them back control without making them feel overwhelmed? It's a very fine dance. So it's, you don't want to eat, that's okay. But when you do feel like eating, here's some great options that will help reduce brain fog and body aches. You don't want to go to therapy? That's fine. Here's a hiking club. Here's a painting class. Here's a photography course that you take by yourself. Here's a widow's retreat that happens, and it's all widows from across the country. Here's a journal. You don't want to do any of those and you just want to sleep? That's okay. Go take a shower first.
Yeah.
Just validate, just hold space, just allow, because they will find the modality that works for them. And as they are embraced and held and lifted up, they're going to be more receptive to other helps, and they're going to start to see that light at the end of the tunnel. How
much, when it comes to, I always ask people in their specific work or about social media and how much that aids into the grieving or helps grieving. You often see, and again, I think social media is great for a lot of things, but there's a lot of negative impact in the sense of, with the younger generations and the likes and the affirmations. And, I'm victim to posting something that I go back and check if it got 10 likes, 15 likes, 20 likes. When it comes to grief, I always wonder the actual impact that it has on an individual, on putting out a post on Facebook, like, hey, I just lost this person's gone. And it's a sudden, do you think that helps the grieving, or do you think that's just a form of grieving, or do you think is there an adverse effect to that? I'm just curious. On that.
And I'm noodling on it and letting it marinate to really think about. Sure. So I think that it's a slippery slope, right? And I think that it's, again, no one size fits all answer. It's going to be different for each person. But I know personally for me, I felt validated in not just posting online, but I joined support groups that were online. Okay. And that was probably more beneficial because they understood. Right. And it wasn't we're still talking about that kind of vibe. No one ever actually said that to me on social media, but there were certainly.
And I guess that's what I mean,
it's
right?
the comments and that perception, that social contract that we all didn't know we signed, where we're just supposed to be over grief at some point, and it makes other people uncomfortable. So we eventually have to stop talking about it. Right. But that's also why I do the work that I do. Right. And I say Craig's name every chance I can. Because
you've never said my husband, you've said Craig the entire conversation. I love that.
I think I said my late husband the first time.
It's opened up.
Play the tape. Right. But that's my point, is that he is the precipice in why I am why I do it. And I think that I would be disingenuous to encourage people to be transparent in talking about their losses if I didn't do it myself. It's like that gym teacher in high school that asks you to do 100 push-ups, but he probably couldn't do one push-up. Yeah. I will never ask anybody to do something that I'm not willing to at least attempt myself. Right. So I have to be transparent in order to help other people understand the benefit in transparency. Yeah. And it's healing for me. It's helpful for me. Right. But to your point, there was and is sometimes times where I will post things on my personal Facebook page and it either gets nothing and I'm like, really, guys? Yeah. Or I'll get like one or two things and the tone is less than desired. Right. You're like, oh, I didn't mean to upset you. Let me just archive this post. And then I will go to my support groups and I know I can post. And if I'm really not feeling like I want feedback, I can post anonymously there. And so there's a little bit of safety and security in a community of people who are going through something similar. But the fact of the matter is, We all are going through it. So why do I have to join a widow specific or a loss specific group on Facebook to feel validated by strangers?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it make more sense to have that validation and that support and camaraderie from the people who love me and I know personally? It's kind of upside down, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What role does peer support play in grieving?
It's integral.
Yeah.
It's integral. I mean, the millions of dollars in research data that is out there for the fostering of community post loss and how it directly impacts mental health and fortitude is astronomical. They say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a community to support a griever.
Before we started, we were chatting about, you started mentioning, your future plans, kind of. Let's go into that. What are the future plans for On Tuesdays We Wear Black?
Yeah, so business is just over a year and a half old. Okay. So we're growing exponentially, which is super exciting. And as a result, we are hosting the first of its kind, the National Grief Awareness Professional Development Conference.
Awesome.
That will be happening right here in Hartford, Connecticut.
Sweet.
Yep, at the Mark Twain House. So honored to have them on board and supporting me. It literally is the first of its kind. There is no conference that takes the concept of grief and integrates it into bereavement and business practices and encourages company culture, retention, and profitability through the lens of supporting grief. Grief is ADA protected, circa 2015 legislation.
Wow.
So if your company is not offering grief-inclusive bereavement supports, you're federally non-compliant. Just fun fact for everyone out there listening. I can help you get compliant. So this conference is bringing industry experts in grief and bereavement together from across the nation for a one-day comprehensive training for business professionals. And so I am currently looking for sponsors and attendees. Tickets are available on Eventbrite.
When is the event?
It is August 31st. So yeah, the conference is big to-dos. I have a professor from Utica University who specializes in teaching death, dying, grief, and bereavement.
Wow.
I have an Emmy award-winning filmmaker who is coming to talk about grief integration. I have an expert financial planner who worked for, I believe, Mass Mutual for 30 years. He wrote the literal handbook on how to have client conversations.
Amazing.
Yeah, so he's going to come and do training for workforce development through grief. Wow. Yeah, some really great content will be there.
Good stuff. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So just to think that I started planning that in February and have it be coming to fruition is incredible. So we're working on that. I am also co-authoring a book called The Faces of Grief, and that will be coming out in December.
Great.
Yep.
Do you have a pre-order link?
I don't have a pre-order link yet, but it will be available for pre-order at the conference.
Okay.
So, and we are doing a book panel at the conference. You'll get to meet a bunch of the co-authors, which will be really exciting. Yeah. And then I host once a month a free community event. It's called Death Cafe. So that is a nonprofit by the same name. It's an international entity. That happens at Daybreak Coffee in Glastonbury.
Yeah, I know where Daybreak is.
Yep. So that will be on May 21st and the third Tuesday of every month after that, from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. It is free coffee provided. And it's just an opportunity for the community to come together and talk about death and help destigmatize it and get comfortable conversating about it. So
love that.
I think it's an important conversation. It's not a support group. It's not a sales pitch or a seminar or anything like that. It's just the community coming together to talk about what makes us uncomfortable.
I love that.
It's not a death sentence to talk about it, right?
I love that. So we got a few minutes here, but before we go, I got a couple of things that I want to wrap up with you. So we touched on your journey, you know, kind of how On Tuesdays We Wear Black came apart, the stories behind that. We talked about the mission of the company and the business and what you're trying to accomplish. We talked about the services and support you provide, and we discussed the secondary losses, which again, I love that piece there.
I do provide a training curriculum specific to businesses on secondary losses. So just keep that in mind.
I love that. And then also we wrapped up here about, or kind of wrapped up, but we talked about the future of the business. I want to know a couple of things. How are you doing now?
Grief never goes away, right? It is an intrinsic part of you. Once you have it, it is the facet to the gem that is Kate. And I get to move forward with it in a very unique way on a very public platform, right? But Transparently, I still have bad days. You know,
Mhm.
there are days where I don't want to get out of bed or I need to be a grief burrito wrapped up in his favorite blanket, a grief burrito, and watch a sad movie that makes
Yeah.
me cry or
Yeah.
eat my feelings or go for a really hard run
Yeah.
or whatever it is. But knowing that that's part of the journey and that's grief is just the leftover love that I didn't get to give him while he was still alive.
I love that.
So embracing it and leaning into it and riding those waves,
Mhm.
and some days I'm not good at it. Other days I'm really good at it, but it's all part of the journey and the joy that I get as having been Craig's wife
Mhm.
and getting to be his widow and doing this mission. And so I do the business coaching to help make the landscape better for people when they go back to work, because working with just individuals isn't going to affect change the way that it should.
Mhm.
We as business professionals and workforce community entities need to create a more inclusive landscape for people who are experiencing loss to come back to work, to be productive, to be healthy, to be functional.
Mhm.
So it's really on the business world to embrace grief at this
Right.
point.
And then for listeners and people who are tuning in, who I have I appreciate everybody who listens to the show. What advice would you have for them, for those who are dealing with grief? We'll say primary, the loss of one, and then the secondary loss.
I would say for people who are supporting people in grief, to remember that it's not your story, it's theirs. Your job is to just hold space.
Mhm.
Put the important dates in your calendar, whether it be the date of loss or their birthday or their wedding anniversary, or even just 6 weeks after the funeral. Just put a note in your calendar to send them a text or a message, or because you don't need that prayer card or whatever to remember the person who's gone. You need it to remember the person who's still here. So just reach out. It is a very isolating and lonely and difficult road to walk. And when you do it alone, that's even harder, right? Your friend circle completely erodes because they either don't want to make you uncomfortable or they don't want you to be the third wheel or they're afraid you're going to say no anyway. Extend the invitation, call them, text them. If you think about doing something, don't ask them if they want you to, just do it. It's very simple reframing of things like, hey, I'm going to the grocery store. Send me your list. You don't have to answer the door. I'll drop it off. Hey, I'm going to pick the kids up from school. Do you want me to pick your kids up too and take them to the playground for a while?
Mhm.
Hey, I left a bouquet of flowers on your front step. When you feel ready, just go outside and grab them. Things like that. Don't drop off the casserole and then go back to your life, because
Right.
we don't need that casserole day one.
Right.
We need that casserole day 101.
Yeah. Yeah. Kate, this was I loved this conversation, and I'm very appreciative and to have you here with me, and again, shout out to Mark to introducing us, and I'm very thankful for the work that you do.
Thank you.
I think you're going to make a really profound impact on a lot of lives and a lot of businesses. So keep doing the work that you're doing,
Thank you so much.
and being courageous and noble in what you do. And I hope maybe we can stay in contact.
I would love that.
And bring you on for another episode to do some maybe in-depth look into the services that you provide.
I would love that. That would be great. And for the listeners, I encourage you, check out my website.
Where can people find you?
You mentioned my blog, and I don't believe in gatekeeping information, so that's why it's a free educational blog. I have a very comprehensive resource list on my website, and everything on my resource list has been personally vetted. Like, I've talked to a live human being. All of the books on my resource list I've personally read. So I don't put anything out there that I don't personally align with or think will be a viable solution for someone. And these are national resources.
Mm-hmm.
I've compiled a list of accredited funeral home databases and whatnot for the whole country.
Sure.
So www.otwwb.com. On Tuesdays, we wear black.com. And on there, you'll find my blog. You'll find my podcast that is specific to the widow experience. It's called Happily Never After. And reach out if people need services. Just know that you're not alone.
Kate, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.